Have you ever trusted someone with all your heart, only to be betrayed when you least expected it? You thought the pain would break you, that the heartbreak would leave scars. But sometimes, the quietest actions speak the loudest. Tonight, I am going to share stories of silent revenge and heartbreak, stories of people who faced betrayal, humiliation, and lies, yet chose patience, dignity, and strategy over confrontation. They didn't shout, they didn't cry out, they waited, they planned, and when the moment came, their silence became their most powerful weapon. These stories aren't just about revenge, they're about strength, self-respect, and the quiet justice that leaves everyone stunned. It starts like any ordinary day in a household where rules are clear and expectations are set. A punishment is given, maybe for something small, a typical scolding or suspension that seems normal to outsiders. At first glance, it appears simple, even trivial, but beneath the surface, what seems like a common consequence transforms into an emotional battlefield. The punishment isn't just about following rules, it's about asserting control, establishing dominance, and testing boundaries. Every word from the parent, every glance from the sibling, every little gesture carries weight, though no one says it outright. What happens next, however, isn't what anyone anticipates. The person on the receiving end of the punishment, instead of reacting with anger or desperation, absorbs it silently. Their calm presence, their quiet acceptance, starts shifting the atmosphere. It's as if the silence itself begins to speak, echoing louder than the words that were meant to punish. This quietness is more than passive compliance. It's a deliberate choice, an emotional strategy that unsettles everyone around them. The sibling who expected apologies, the parent who expected immediate remorse, suddenly feel a subtle tension they didn't foresee. It's the beginning of a transformation where what seemed like weakness is actually strength in disguise. As the day unfolds, small details become significant. A glance exchanged, a smirk that falters, a moment of hesitation. These are all consequences of the silent stance. No confrontation is needed because the presence of calm defies the usual expectations of reaction. The person enduring the punishment is not simply waiting for it to end. They are observing, calculating, and understanding the dynamics at play. Every action from others is noted, every expectation is recognized, and yet nothing is rushed. The quiet endurance becomes a mirror, reflecting the impatience, the assumptions, and even the mistakes of those who believed control was entirely theirs. As this silent struggle continues, it creates a shift in perspective. The focus moves from the original act that caused the punishment to the psychological and emotional power unfolding in real time. Those who intended to dominate or humiliate begin to sense the imbalance of energy. They realize that punishment, when met with quiet strength, loses some of its authority. The person who was expected to crumble instead demonstrates an invisible resilience. This invisible power, though unseen by the casual observer, is deeply felt in subtle gestures, in the slight tension in voices, and in the unspoken acknowledgement that something unexpected is happening. What starts as a simple, everyday consequence becomes an intricate game of emotional chess. The silent participant understands the value of patience, timing, and perception. Every word, every reaction from others is a piece on the board, and the quiet endurance ensures that the final move is decisive. It's not a loud victory. It doesn't require confrontation or dramatics. Yet, it carries more impact than any shouted argument ever could. In this way, the ordinary punishment evolves into a story of strategic patience, hidden strength, and psychological insight. It demonstrates that sometimes the most powerful response isn't retaliation or outburst, but quiet observation, self-control, and the subtle assertion of one's presence. The calm that seems so passive to some is actually the foundation of a larger emotional victory, one that teaches lessons to everyone involved without a single raised voice or visible clash. Sometimes, the loudest reactions aren't the ones that leave a mark. The quiet ones do. In T's story, the protagonist faces a situation where confrontation seems inevitable, where the natural response would be to argue, plead, or beg for understanding. The sibling expects an apology, the parent expects compliance, and the entire household assumes that the punishment will trigger tears or resentment. But instead of meeting the tension with noise, the protagonist chooses a different path, one of calm observation and quiet endurance. This decision isn't born out of fear or submission. It's a calculated strategy, an unspoken way of reclaiming control over a situation that seems unfair or frustrating. By remaining silent, the protagonist creates a sense of mystery. Others are left guessing, trying to interpret every expression, every pause, every carefully measured word. It's in this ambiguity that the power of the quiet response lies. When no loud arguments or dramatic gestures occur, those who expected emotional reactions feel a subtle shift in energy. Their authority feels challenged, not through direct confrontation, but simply by the refusal to react predictably. This quietness forces everyone to pause and reassess, to confront the reality that control isn't solely theirs, and that sometimes strength doesn't announce itself through noise. The calm presence acts as a mirror, reflecting back the assumptions, expectations, and impatience of others. Every glance, every word spoken toward the protagonist is filtered through this silent lens, and it becomes clear that the intended effect of punishment or dominance is no longer working. Instead, the silence becomes a weapon, invisible yet immensely powerful. It communicates confidence, self-possession, and emotional intelligence in a way that words cannot. Over time, the environment begins to change, subtly. The sibling who anticipated a hasty apology notices the lack of urgency. The parent who expected immediate contrition senses the patience and control, and even casual observers might feel the tension without understanding why. It's a silent rebellion, not of disrespect, but of wisdom. The protagonist understands that the real leverage lies not in confrontation, but in the careful use of presence and timing. Every interaction is measured, every response considered, and every pause deliberate. This isn't mere avoidance. It's a conscious choice to wield silence as a tool of influence. As the story unfolds, the quiet response achieves something far more satisfying than a shouted argument ever could. It shifts dynamics, changes expectations, and slowly rewrites the narrative of the situation. Those who expected drama are left in a state of anticipation, unsure how to proceed, while the protagonist moves forward with confidence, dignity, and a subtle sense of triumph. The silence is not emptiness. It is intention, strategy, and strength personified. It creates a scenario where the outcome is determined not by who shouts the loudest, but by who holds their composure, understands the emotions at play, and navigates the situation with foresight. By choosing quiet over confrontation, the protagonist demonstrates that real power often lies in self-restraint, patience, and the ability to control the emotional tempo of a situation. This approach leaves a lasting impression, teaching those who thought they held all the leverage that sometimes the strongest reactions are invisible, measured, and profoundly transformative. The silence speaks volumes, altering perceptions and outcomes in ways that words or arguments never could, turning what seemed like a simple family conflict into a masterclass of quiet strategy and emotional intelligence. Sometimes, the quietest responses carry the heaviest weight. In situations where betrayal, disappointment, or punishment occurs, most people expect loud protests, tears, or desperate pleas for fairness. They assume that reaction is the measure of strength, that emotion must be displayed to convey pain or defiance. But there are those who understand that real power doesn't need to announce itself. The protagonist in this story finds themselves facing a moment of unfairness, perhaps a punishment from a parent or a betrayal from a sibling, where everyone expects immediate remorse or submission. Instead of reacting in the obvious way, they choose stillness. They don't argue, they don't beg, and they don't even rush to apologize. Their silence is deliberate, a conscious decision that unsettles everyone around them. At first, it seems passive. Observers may mistake it for weakness, for helplessness. They expect the quiet will eventually crack, that sooner or later, frustration or guilt will spill out. But the silence is not empty. It is full of intent, observation, and careful emotional calculation. Every gesture, every word from the others is noted, analyzed, and absorbed. The protagonist is learning, understanding the dynamics at play, and silently asserting their own presence without confrontation. The effect on others is immediate, subtle. The sibling who demanded an apology starts to question why it hasn't come. The parent who expected instant submission notices a hesitation that wasn't there before. The quietness forces them to reconsider their assumptions, to confront the reality that the protagonist isn't reacting in the predictable way they anticipated. Silence, in this context, becomes a form of control. It challenges authority not through force or argument, but through the refusal to be manipulated emotionally. It communicates confidence, patience, and quiet strength. The longer the silence lasts, the more tension builds. Small details take on significance. A glance that lingers too long, a breath that seems heavier than usual, a pause that stretches just a moment longer than expected. These tiny moments are amplified by the quiet, creating an atmosphere of anticipation and uncertainty. It's a psychological shift that slowly changes the balance of power. What began as a straightforward conflict evolves into an intricate game of perception, where the protagonist's calmness speaks louder than any shout, and their composure becomes a subtle form of resistance. Observers start to realize that what they believed was weakness is actually a strategic choice, and understanding that real influence lies in controlling oneself before trying to control others. The quiet response transforms the dynamic entirely. Those who thought they had authority or leverage begin to doubt their own actions and expectations. The protagonist, by doing nothing outwardly dramatic, has changed the narrative. They have taught patience, dignity, and the power of emotional intelligence. Without saying a single word, it is a reminder that sometimes the strongest reactions are invisible. The most powerful lessons come from restraint, and the most lasting victories are earned in silence. The quiet doesn't just endure the situation. It subtly reshapes it, leaving a lasting impact that words or force could never achieve, proving that restraint and strategic silence often speak louder than anger or confrontation ever could. There's a moment in every story of silent revenge when patience becomes the most powerful weapon. The protagonist, having endured betrayal, humiliation, or injustice, realizes that reacting immediately or loudly would only satisfy the expectations of those who wronged them. Instead, they embrace stillness, allowing time to pass and observing every detail of the situation with sharp awareness. This is where strategy meets emotion, where the quiet mind understands the balance of power better than any raised voice ever could. At first, those around the protagonist are unaware of the depth of this silence. The sibling who mocked, the friend who betrayed, or the parent who imposed unfair punishment all assume that the situation is under their control, that the silence is simply weakness. They do not see the calculations unfolding beneath a calm exterior. Every word, every glance, every subtle movement of the protagonist is intentional, a thread in the web that will eventually turn the tables. It is in these small, almost imperceptible moments that true control begins to shift. The silence acts as a mirror, reflecting the assumptions and mistakes of others. Their impatience becomes visible, their frustration grows, and their attempts to provoke a reaction reveal more about themselves than about the protagonist. By not responding immediately, the protagonist forces everyone to confront the reality that influence and power do not always come from confrontation. Sometimes, they come from understanding, observation, and the ability to wait for the right moment. This quiet strength transforms ordinary interactions into a subtle battlefield where timing and perception determine the outcome. The protagonist does not need to shout or argue because their composure is a statement in itself. Every pause, every delayed response, every careful choice in action communicates something profound to those around them. They're not powerless. They are planning, calculating, and allowing the natural consequences of others' impatience and arrogance to reveal themselves. Slowly, the dynamic shifts. The sibling or friend who expected dominance begins to feel unsettled. The parent or authority figure realizes that the protagonist is not reacting in a way they can control. The power of silence is revealed not through confrontation, but through the emotional and psychological impact it creates. It teaches lessons in ways words cannot, demonstrating patience, resilience, and self. In these stories, the protagonist's quiet approach often leads to an unexpected turning point, a single calm action, a perfectly timed response, or simply the continuation of dignity and composure can completely change the situation. Those who believed they held all the leverage are caught off guard, forced to reassess their assumptions, and sometimes even experience a sense of guilt or regret for underestimating the quiet individual. This type of silent strategy is far more satisfying than immediate retaliation because it allows the protagonist to maintain control of their emotions, while subtly reshaping the outcome. The beauty of it lies in its simplicity and its effectiveness. While others may have expected chaos or emotional outbursts, they're met instead with composure and quiet strength that speaks louder than any dramatic action. It is a reminder that power is not always about being the loudest in the room. Sometimes it is about observing, calculating, and acting with precision. In the end, those who wronged the protagonist often realize too late that their assumptions were their own undoing, and the victory of the silent observer is complete. The lessons learned in these moments are lasting, teaching that dignity, patience, and strategiagam are the most powerful forms of revenge and self-respect that anyone can wield. The most powerful moments in silent revenge are often not about the act itself, but the reactions it creates. In this story, the protagonist has endured betrayal, humiliation, or mistreatment, and rather than retaliating with obvious confrontation, they allow others' own actions to become their undoing. It begins subtly, with quiet observation and a careful awareness of everyone's expectations. Those who believe they hold all the control are unaware that every word, every gesture, and every assumption they make is being noticed, recorded in the protagonist's mind, and used as a guide for what comes next. The beauty of this kind of silent response lies in its unpredictability. People around the protagonist are accustomed to certain reactions: anger, tears, or immediate apologies. When these expected responses do not arrive, unease begins to creep in. The sibling who expected dominance, the friend who counted on manipulation, or the parent who assumed authority all start questioning their assumptions. They are met with a calm that unsettles them more than any outburst could. This calmness is strategic. It communicates strength without words, patience without compromise, and dignity without arrogance. The protagonist's silence becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the arrogance and impatience of others, but also the consequences of their own actions. As the day progresses, the tension grows. Small gestures, a smirk that falters, a frown that deepens, a glance that lingers too long becomes significant, revealing cracks in the facade of those who thought they were in control. The quiet approach creates an emotional imbalance, a subtle shift in power that is felt even if it cannot be immediately explained. It forces those around the protagonist to confront the reality that the expected outcome will not happen as they had imagined. This is the moment where silent revenge reveals its true power. The protagonist does not need to take any extreme action. The reactions of others are the ultimate payoff. When patience and composure meet the arrogance or manipulation of someone who thought they had leverage, the impact is magnified. Observers who expected compliance or weakness are stunned by the quiet resilience of the protagonist. Every carefully measured pause, every deliberate choice to withhold an immediate reaction adds to the tension and heightens the emotional stakes. It is in this interplay between expectation and reality that the story finds its suspense. Those who wronged the protagonist begin to realize that their attempts to dominate, manipulate, or humiliate have backfired. The intended effect of fear, anger, or submission is replaced by unease, regret, and sometimes even self-reflection. The silence acts as a teacher, demonstrating lessons about patience, respect, and the unexpected power of restraint. In these moments, it becomes clear that revenge or emotional triumph does not need to be dramatic or confrontational. The quiet, measured response allows the protagonist to maintain composure, control, and dignity, while still achieving a profound impact on those who underestimated them. The emotional payoff is internal yet deeply felt by everyone else, creating a sense of awe and realization that is far more satisfying than any shouting, match, or public confrontation could deliver. The story demonstrates that the strength of silence lies in its subtlety, its ability to create suspense, and its capacity to teach lessons indirectly. By letting the reactions of others unfold naturally, the protagonist achieves victory not through force or argument, but through observation, patience, and the quiet assertion of their own emotional power. This kind of strategic calm is a defining feature of silent revenge, showing that sometimes the most powerful outcomes are achieved not by acting loudly, but by allowing others' missteps and arrogance to do the work. In the end, these stories remind us that true strength is not measured by loud arguments or impulsive reactions. It lies in patience, dignity, and the quiet power of knowing your worth. Those who betray, humiliate, or underestimate you often reveal their own weaknesses without you having to do a thing. Silence becomes more than a choice. It becomes a statement, a strategy, and a subtle victory. By holding your composure, observing carefully, and responding with intention rather than emotion, you not only reclaim control but also teach lessons that words alone cannot convey. These stories are proof that the most lasting impact comes not from confrontation, but from self-respect, strategic outcome, and the courage to rise above pain without losing yourself. In Takit, you find your power, and in restraint, you find your triumph.